Okay, another Survivor rant. I don't know if I'm excited of this or not, but it's season 12, and that was a pretty good season. Message 7, all about Survivor 12. This is Desi, your host on Unsent Voice Memos, and this week we are doing another Survivor episode. When I released this, season 12 would have finished about a month ago, and with my obsession with Survivor, I thought I would do a bit of a recap on it. So today's episode will slightly differ from previous ones that I've done so far with my obsession. So today, like as I said, it's an obsession episode, but this one's definitely got to be more obsession based just because it's season 12 and last episode I already explained why I have an obsession with Survivor and just the impact it had on my life. So today I'm just going to be like commenting on my favorite moves and moments from this season. So, season 12 was about redemption, and it was definitely a treat to watch. Season 12 is probably one of my favorite seasons of Australian Survivor so far because, like, not only the returnees had like such an epic game, but also the newbies were so good. And I feel like that's doesn't always happen. Like, I can't think of a season. Actually, I'm gonna kind of compare this to season 8 at the moment because I feel like it was similar in that sense, in the sense of there were like half newbies, half returnees, and I felt like that season didn't do as well as this season. So yeah, I definitely preferred season 12 because like with the returnees and the newbies. So first I am going to talk about the returnees. So apart from Harry, who was voted out only 10 days into the game, all of the returnees made it to merge and they played an epic game. So the four returnees were Harry, Mark, Brooke, and Simon. And first, I'm going to talk about Mark. So after being stranded by his allies in season 9, he made sure to come back with a bang. Literally, his first move, first tribal council, and first blindside. Like, that was just such an epic moment. Like, he clocked straight away that Kat, who had played Traders on New Zealand, would do really well, and he was like, she needs to be out straight away. And that first tribal council was epic. I remember like there were so many stand-up conversations, and it was like quite a chaotic one for the first one. And then they end up blindsiding Kat, which was just such a really good move from Mark. And obviously he had a reputation going into the game as a returnee and knowing he was going to be a threat. So I really felt like he played that threat level really well to the point where so many people were scared to vote out Mark because of his threat level. So he definitely did that really well with like establishing that in the first blindside. He also another notable move of his was his closest allies blindside. So his closest ally was Faith, and together Faith and Mark were called the Ruby Soho Alliance. And then Keely was also like a part of that alliance, and the three of them together were head office. And there's this one point in the episode that Faith gets voted out where Faith and Mark are talking, and Faith is like, "Oh, just so you know, I would never let you get to final two." And I think that really blew Faith's game. Like, she was really good, but I think that kind of blew up her game by saying that. So Faith and Mark are really close, like they could be friends. But when Mark heard Faith say that, he was like, hang on, if that's the case, I should vote out Faith before she votes me out because that's going to be very possible. And that's exactly what he did. He voted Faith out the tribal before merge, and I think that was a very good move. But then, like all big players, I always feel like a lot of them have a fatal flaw. For Mark, his fatal flaw was trusting Caleb. Caleb, from the very beginning, was a double agent, and he played the double agent game very well. And he ended up being able to convince Mark that he was on his side and would vote with them. And then he managed to blindside Mark, and I would call that Caleb's move, and that is why Mark got voted out. So that was his only flaw in the game, and that's why he got voted out. Next, I am going on to Brooke. So Brooke was originally in the first season of Australian Survivor, and so it has been 10 years, and in those 10 years, she has become a mother, and her redemption for this season was to finally win the game because she has gotten so close every single time. and she also wanted to prove to her daughter that she could still play Survivor and do really well. And I think she did exactly that. Like 10 years later, she still won so many individual immunities. She has the highest record with individual immunities, with having 10 total won throughout her career in Survivor. And then also this season, she was just so good at hunting for idols. Like, I don't know actually how many she found. I think she found 3 full idols and then a half idol, which is like, how does one do that? And she always found them when she needed them, which worked out really well for her. And I think her winning all those individual immunities plus finding all the idols allowed her to get as far in the game she did. And then, of course, she reached 100 days and she was the fourth person to do so. And reaching 100 days in Survivor is a very big deal, as not too many people have done it, especially in the Australian Survivor realm. So that was definitely good. And I'm like not talking too much about her, but she did have really amazing gameplay. Going back to the idols, like, because one of them was like a swap idol situation. So what I mean by that is there was someone called Lyndall in the game, and she found an idol on the beach for the other tribe, and she decided to tell Brooke. So the fact that Lyndall trusted Brooke that much, who was a returnee, to be like, hey, I've got your idol, can you find me my idol, and then we'll do the swap, was pretty impressive for Brooke, as in, like, she managed to make her threat level low enough at the beginning, but then she knew when she needed to get her threat level high, and by merge, all the newbies were, like, against the returnees, so I think that way Brooke stayed in the game quite long, like, in comparison to the other two returnees who made it to merge, because she was the final person to get voted out of the returnees. So props to her for making that goal, and she also now has the second highest amount of days in Australian Survivor, so that's another thing. And finally, of the returnees, I am going to talk about Simon. His redemption at the beginning of the season was playing an idol correctly, especially after going out with 2 in season 6, which is pretty rough. And while from memory he didn't actually find any hidden idols, he did have an idol play I would consider. So this is like when there was a merged tribal council, he managed to win an individual immunity along with Faith, and then David announced that whichever tribe wins fire, they would be safe. So Simon then managed to win fire, and then he gave off his necklace to Rich, saving Rich, and that was like a big move in the game. That was really great for his resume. So yeah, that was pretty good for him. And like apart from that, I think he also found like his redemption through not playing immunity idols, because this was like the best he's played the game. Like as someone who has watched all his seasons from Survivor, and after like season 6 and 8 where he played with George, I think not having such an enemy in season 12 helped him a lot. And I will say this is the best game that Simon has played, and I think that is like props in itself. And he was also the second person to make 100 days this season and fifth person overall. And as I was just saying earlier with Brooke, 100 days is such a milestone. And knowing he also had like panicked that he was going to get voted out in his 99th day, like George did, and then he didn't, I will say that is pretty impressive, because he did some stuff to make sure he didn't get voted out, but he also had to have faith in the survivor gods, and they worked out in his favor. And just to end this like whole returning part off, a lot of them I know are going to return back to the game. Like both Brooke and Simon have families now, and then I don't actually know if Harry has a family, but this is his third time playing, and he said, "Yeah, I'm leaving the game." Mark is the only like potential returnee I would say that has a chance of coming back, but most of them, if not all of them, are gonna come back in the game. So I am glad to know that like they all left with a bang. Like even Harry, who only had 10 days in the game, he did this like Russian roulette thing with Jackson where he said, so you can either vote me or Jackson out, and they were both in the bottom for context, and they knew one of them was going to get voted out. So Harry was like, you can vote for either myself or Jackson, but just so you know, you're playing a bit of Russian roulette because one of us has the flint. And also, for a bit of context, flint is what is used to make fire, and fires everything in the game. So all the players were risking a lot by voting one of the two. And though the move was unsuccessful, it was like quite a big move, and he went out with a bang. So, yeah. And now I am going to move on to the newbie players. So, majority of the newbie players will like get intimidated by the returnees in the game. Like, I'm just going to take season 8 as an example. Though a newbie won, not many of the newbies actually worked with the returnees. But like, none of these people really had that mindset. And I will say, not all of the newbies played spectacularly, but a lot of them did. And they were definitely like part of the reason why this season was one of the best to watch, especially for me. So I'm going to talk about quite a few of them. So the first one I'm going to talk about, I won't do too much because I kind of talked about her with Mark, is Faith. So she was voted out just before merge, and she made an excellent move by pairing with Mark and becoming his closest ally because she could learn a lot from him, yet didn't have to be threatened because she knew that, oh, I'm Mark's closest ally, he won't vote me out. But then she still made other friendships, like, for example, Keeley, even though those three together were in the head office alliance, I would say Faith and Keeley were closer compared to Mark. And then, as I mentioned a bit earlier, her fatal flaw was telling Mark that she won't take him to final two, and that's what caused her blind side. And they will say on the note, I feel like the best way for big players to go out, and they usually go out this way, they either know that they're getting voted out because they have like no other options and they've been saving themselves multiple times that it makes sense for them to get voted out, or they just get completely blindsided because of how big of a player they are and they do get a bit too egotistical and stuff. And this definitely happened with a lot of players this season. Faith being one of them. I would say Mark was somewhat blindsided, but he was also like expecting it to some extent. Like, he was expecting to get votes, but he wasn't expecting to be voted out. And then another one who I'll talk about is Ben. He wasn't expecting a blindside and he got blindsided. And then there was Asha and Lottie. They both got blindsided. And that actually leads me on to Lottie. So she was one of the biggest game players this season, and she became a game player quite quickly. She conducted Harry's vote because she like immediately clocked that Harry was a danger, and she managed to make relationships all around her being like, hey, Harry is a danger, we need to vote him out as quickly as possible. And then she ended up getting blindsided in the first tribal council of merge, and sadly didn't get to make the jury, but I would have loved to see Lottie on the jury because I feel like she would have asked like a really good question at the final tribal council. And I will actually explain final tribal council a bit later on that note. So there's not too much to say on Lottie, but she was definitely a big game player, and I loved watching her play. She was very good, and I would definitely love to see Lottie as a returnee. So next we have Ben. So he played a bit more in the shadows for the first half of the game, but I feel like after the creation of the Beauty and the Beast alliance and then Asha's Blindside, which was conducted by that alliance, he got a bit of momentum. He actually created the Resistance, as he called it, and the Resistance was essentially banning all the newbies together, being like, hey, we need to vote out all the returnees because they're going to control the game if we let them. But if we all get together, we have the numbers, they can't win. And that's exactly like what he did. He got all the newbies together, creating a majority, and then voting Mark out, which was so good for him. But his fatal flaw was trusting Jackson too much. So I would say Ben and Jackson's were like ride or dies, and then Ben was getting a tiny bit cocky because of the power getting to his head. And then Simon made a deal with the newbies, being like, whoever is first to flip on your alliance, I will draw your rock if we ever go to rocks. And I will actually now explain what rocks are. So rocks is essentially you vote and then you get into a tie, and then you vote again, and then you get into another tie. And if you get into another tie, then the two people who were in the tie become safe. The person who has the necklace becomes safe, and then everyone else has to draw a rock. And if you draw the black rock, then you're out, or the others are white. So it is essentially a game of chance with rocks, and it's a really bad way to get voted off, but some people are willing to go to it. We've never had rocks in Australian Survivor history, and I really do hope we go to rocks soon because I really want to see what happened. But yeah, so Jackson ended up taking Simon's bait. Simon can't actually draw two rocks, it is against the rules, and Simon was really lucky that they never went to rocks in that scenario. But yeah, Jackson took Simon Steele, voted off Ben. So that was a really good move for Jackson, and Ben was blindsided. So yeah. Next is Keely. And despite having never watched the game, she was the best strategist I have seen in a long time. I will compare her to Kirby in some sense, because Kirby was also really good strategist and had never watched the game. So I'd say that way they're quite comparable. And the thing with Keely, she wasn't afraid to make big moves. Like, she wanted to get Mark out eventually. Though she didn't conduct the Mark vote herself, I think she was, in the end, happy with it. And I think Keely has made her mark in the game with the fake idol move. That whole tribal council was amazing. And this fake idol move goes a bit back. I would say it takes the course over maybe a week in the Survivor game. I could be wrong. So what happened was Keely ended up getting voted onto Redemption Beach, which was a bit of a blindside. And there was this chest on Redemption Beach, which had advantage inside, but that's kind of not relevant to this. What was more relevant was on the chest, there was this emblem that she could chip off, and the emblem looked like a hidden immunity idol. So she chipped that off and saved it, being like, if I ever want to make a counterfeit idol, I have a pretty good one. So she put that away. And then when she realized herself and Brooke were in danger, and at this point they were only in a three, it was Keely, Brooke, and Simon. So they were quite in distress, you could say. They had no chance of getting newbies on their side at the time. So what they did is Keely managed to find a real idol at one of the rewards, and then Keely and Brooke made a fake idol, and it was the best fake idol ever made in Australian Survivor history. I'm not sure about all Survivor history, but that is very possible. So then come to Tribal Council. Keely reveals she has an idol, and then Brooke reveals she also has an idol, but Brooke has the fake idol. And a couple of the players clocked that pretty quickly. So then a couple of the players stood up and were like, let's still put vote on Brooke because she probably has the fake idol, but let's not put votes on Keely because she definitely has a real idol. So they did that. But what they weren't anticipating was that Keely would play her idol for Brooke, and Brooke would play her fake idol for Keely. So then Brooke ended up being safe, and Keely wasn't. But then the newbies got a bit freaked out, so they ended up putting votes on Blanche, and then Blanche ended up getting voted out, and she was on the Resistance Alliance. That was very unfortunate for Blanche, but it was definitely an epic move. And while the returnees plus Keely didn't get out who they wanted, it was still, like I said, a good move and was very good for her resume. And I think if she had managed to get to the final two, looking at who the final five was, if she got to the final two, she would have easily won the game because her moves were quite big. And she had been playing the game from the very beginning, as where the other four hadn't, I felt like. And they did know that, so then Keely did end up getting voted out after 5. But yeah, I will say Keely was a really good game player, and I'm happy she managed to stay in the game for quite a bit. And now I am going to talk about our final two. And before I even talk about our final two, I'm just going to kind of talk about what the final two tribal council looks like. So what happens actually, I'm going to backtrack a bit and go to final 3. So once you're in final 3, the last challenge is always an endurance challenge, and it's usually quite painful. And essentially, whoever wins the endurance challenge then decides who they get to take to the final tribal council. And then the 2 players in the final tribal council pitch themselves to the jury and why they should win that season of Survivor. And then the jury has the opportunity to ask questions. And then the jury has the power to decide who the winner is, and they write down who they think they should win. And that's why part of the reason I have always loved the game of Survivor, because you have to make big moves to impress the jury. But if you have so many people on the jury against you and then you have a bitter jury, it makes it very hard to win. So, yeah. Now that I've explained the final tribal council, I am going to talk about our final 2. So, first we have Jackson, and I will say he had so much growth in this season, and he definitely found his redemption. So he was a part of the Arsha Blind side, and he was definitely like pushing it. And though it wasn't his idea, I still say as a final 2, he got that move. And then he also did Blend's blind side, and that is like completely his credit. He also won 2 immunity necklaces, which showed he was not only good at strategy, but he was good at the physical challenge, and he arguably won those necklaces when he needed them the most, because he won them in final 5 and final 4. And then you can't forget, like I would say this is quite an iconic move from Jackson. In the final endurance challenge, she was like, I need to beat both Caleb and Loz, because otherwise I won't get to final 2. And he pushed himself so far. Like, I remember thinking he is pushing himself way too much. He needs to get down. And like, I think there was like 3 stages, and by the time they got to the final stage, he was saying he was sick, but he would like not get off. He was shaking so bad. And I remember like David had to go over and help Jackson get off, and he was still like so mad about it, because in his head he probably thought, I've lost now. I haven't, like, I'm not entirely sure what was going through his head, but he probably thought that he wouldn't get to the final tribal council. And I get that. Even I thought he wouldn't get to the final tribal council if he didn't win, because I thought that Loz and Caleb would take each other. And then, of course, in true Jackson style, he had his whole showbiz thing. He, like, I will talk about a couple moments with his whole showbiz. One was with Harry's blind side. He was like, I'm not letting you guys, like, you guys can vote me out, but I'm not gonna let you lose Flint over it. So he pulls out the Flint from his pocket and gives it to someone else. And that probably made players trust him more over Harry, because they're like, okay, at least he's being a team player. And then Harry ended up getting voted out. So that was definitely his move. And then he also made a really interesting statement. The newbies called themselves the underdogs, and then Jackson was like, none of you guys are underdogs, because you haven't actually made a move at this point. Like, sure, you were once underdogs, but you never made a move, so you can't still call yourselves the underdogs. And then he said, whereas I am an underdog, because yes, I was a newbie, but then I came out and I made a massive move against Ben, and hence I'm an underdog. And I definitely agreed with his statement with that he was an underdog, and that the others were kind of excessively calling themselves the underdogs, but I wouldn't say it was like a bad name for them. And then, of course, the final tribal council, he had a way to pitch himself really well. And I was kind of, not extremely, but I was kind of surprised when he did end up winning, because I thought his pitch was really good. But I also think that the newbies were a bit biased, being like, we need to vote for Caleb because he stuck with us the whole time and we think he made more moves. And that leads me on to the winner of season 12 Survivor, Caleb. And I would say he definitely deserved the win and found redemption. So his redemption was about being the underdog, and he came out of his shell, especially during the Mark blindside. Like that way, while I did just say a lot of people in the underdogs alliance didn't make any big moves, Caleb did. And like the Mark blindside, that was his first big move on his resume, and it also got Mark impressed with him when he was voted out. And I think because I remember in the final tribal council, Ben saying that wasn't really your move. But I think what Ben didn't realize, and Mark helped him slightly when he was trying to pitch that it was his move, was that Caleb played a really good double agent game. It's the best one I have ever seen, and he has been the only double agent, I think, that has won the game. So, what being a double agent means in Survivors, you play both sides. Like, if there are two alliances, you're in both alliances. And he played that really well. And what he did with the Mark vote was he went up to Ben being like, I think it was meant to be a completely different vote. And then Caleb went up to Ben being like, hey, Mark pitched your name. You should probably vote for Mark. Otherwise, he's going to get you out and vote for you. And then he went over to Mark being like, hey, vote Ben. Ben's going to vote you. And you should probably vote out Ben. So he double crossed him a bit. And then he was the swing vote. So he could decide if Mark or Ben was getting voted out. And then he decided to put a vote on Mark and he got voted out. So definitely his move with the Mark blindside. And then he, like another thing, he was also gotten the record for the fastest fire making challenge in Australian Survivor history, and it got him in the top 3. So what happens in Final Four, because there's only 4 people, if you end up in a tie the first time, instead of doing another tiebreaker, you go straight into fire making, and whoever burns through the rope first and raises the flag wins their spot in the game, and the other person gets their torch snuffed. So Caleb won that, and he made his fire pretty quickly and got him in the top 3. And then part of Survivor is having the 3 elements: outwit, outlast, and outplay. And by Final 3, he hadn't really won any physical challenges, so he didn't have the outplay part. But then he got that in the final challenge and proved to be a physical threat. He won the final challenge, and then when he thought, oh, he can't do too much, he's probably just going to keep Loz by his side and then do that, vote out Jackson, the expected. And then he blindsides Loz in the final 3, which is like, you usually like wouldn't expect that, because it's like, how do you do a blindside in the final 3 as you're the only one voting? But he did, and everyone was shocked by it, including me. I remember like gasping, I don't know how to say that word entirely, like which one's right, at my screen because of the move. And I was flabbergasted. I could not believe it. But I was so happy for Jackson because I did want Jackson to win, but I'm still very happy Caleb won. And that kind of just wraps up season 12. And I will say, all the newbies will definitely make some of the best returnees the game has ever seen if they come back to play another season. And I definitely want all of them to, because they would have such good gameplays, and now having played a season, they will be so much better than they already were, and they are already pretty good. So I definitely want to see all of them come back in another season. If it's all in the same season or just like different seasons, I would love to see them play again. And like this season had epic gameplays and epic players, but we can't forget our host David. So David had high expectations going into this season and had major shoes to fill after JLP left unexpectedly after season 10. And I am a bit of a harsh critic, especially when it comes to showing Survivor, because I am like a dedicated fan and love the show. And David did an amazing job. I just love the fact that he let the players have a bit more control during tribal council, as it made it so much more interesting. And a tiny bit of a side note, but this season had the best tribal councils that I have ever seen, and they were also chaotic. Like, it was so often that players are just standing up out of their seats and having side conversations. Like, that happened less in the beginning seasons, and then it gained a bit of popularity, you could say. And then this season, it was just like every like third tribal council, there was someone standing up, being like, "Hey, let's go have a conversation quickly." And I feel like just the last minute moves are also so good because you never expect them as an audience. Because watching the show, you do kind of expect the blind sides because you hear those conversations. But with the side conversations, you do kind of hear them, but you don't know what people are thinking in that moment because it's the scramble. And people are like, do I stick with what I was originally told or do I go with this new move? And yeah, I just love the whole chaotic tribal council. And another thing, I could kind of be wrong with this, but he was an ex player. And I felt like he had a different way of connecting with the players as being an ex player. And I felt like it was a more personal than JLP. And it was also amazing. Like, I do know JLP was an amazing host, and I still love him as a host. But I definitely think David filled his shoes pretty well. And he obviously has time to grow as a host and become even better. So I am definitely looking forward to that. So now season 12 has come to a wrap, sadly, and so is this episode. And while season 13 in Malaysia will take place next year, the next episode will come out next week on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and 10 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Make sure if you are on Spotify to follow me, and if you are on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to Unsent Voice Memos. And don't forget to follow Unsent Voice Memos podcast on Instagram. And I hope you guys will tune in next week. Well, that's kind of it for the Survivor rants. I am definitely going to miss them, but we'll probably have one next year. Who knows? But I definitely can't wait for next week's episode. I am really excited for it. But for the meantime, message 7 concluded.